let me introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Mr. Andre Boyson. He is Chief Identity Officer at Secure Key Technologies Incorporation. He'll be sharing his thoughts about digital identity and what COVID-19 has taught us about identity. So I will request Mr. Andre to please share his screen and then share his thoughts about this topic. Thank you. Could you please unmute?
There we go. Hi there. Sorry, I had to get the permission to unmute there. Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time and spending with me. What I wanted to talk about is an experience of what I've been working on Canada for the last decade. And our company is involved in trying to make it easier for online service delivery organizations like banks and telcos and government to move services online. And we've had quite a bit of experience prior to COVID, but I want to share what we've learned since COVID because it's actually really illustrative of the problems that we encounter when we don't have digital identity. So I want to kind of take you through some of that thinking today. Okay, so one thing we're all familiar with, we all have a lot of user IDs and passwords, and I want to kind of link together the three things that sound different but are in fact the same problem. So there's me, the user, who wants to access a government or a banking service, and I can't remember the password, so we've got that issue. We've got the service delivery organization, which is the bank, telco, or the government who's trying to serve me. The challenge they've got is they don't know if it's really me or if it's a crook trying to pretend to be me. So they have this problem, and so they try to, when I show up and I can't remember, they ask me lots of questions and I can't remember the answer. And so they have this dual tensions that they want to let Andre in, but they also want to keep the crook out. And so we see this pattern where if users have on average, 50 or 60 services they're accessing online, every one of those has the same password for the user for the most part. And even if the password's not the same, the recovery questions, the things you asked me when I forgot my password, are the same. And so this leads to mass data breaches because the crooks can use this data to replay at other services. And that becomes a national security issue for an entire economy. So those three things are linked. And if we can solve this problem properly, I think we can actually get to a much better place for service delivery. But COVID in particular has taught us something very interesting. In the times of COVID, the challenge we have is if I'm at home and I suspect I have a fever, I want to get to the hospital and get COVID. So before they let me go, they ask me to answer some questions, and then I have to show up at the right hospital later because they have specialist COVID hospitals, and then they have other hospitals that are doing the regular hospital visits, if I can call it that. So we need a way to link this online triage that I've done with the person who shows up at the hospital. And the COVID people got to go to the COVID lineup, and everybody else goes to the regular lineup. And we don't have any great way to do this today. But even more than that, in times of COVID, sure, we've got to help the people that are sick. That's for sure. But we still have to run the rest of the economy. I'm just going to tell you a quick story of what this means for me. During the pandemic, twice actually, I was completing a real estate transaction, and my lawyer is a personal friend who's known me for 20 years. And despite the fact he's known me for 20 years, he's not allowed to just tell the Law Society he knows me. He has to be able to put his hand on his heart and say, Andre saw this sign this document. And the challenge with that is that he's at his house and I'm at my house. And so what he had me do was turn on FaceTime so that he could see me sign the document. So if you can picture, I've got my phone in my left hand with FaceTime turned on. And I've got the pen in the other hand because I got to sign the document. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to sign a piece of paper if you're not holding it, but it's hard to do because the paper moves. So now I had to take my phone with my hand with the phone and stick my elbow on the piece of paper and then turn it so he could see my face and the pen at the same time and then sign the document. That's how we're doing digital transactions in the time of pandemic. It's kind of nutty. And so we need it for healthcare, and we need it for the rest of the economy too. But this is the most interesting learning from my point of view, is that the future of identity is going to be touch-free. Just think of this for the moment. During the times of COVID, if I go sign up for a new service, the challenge is the person on the other side of the counter is looking at me saying, he might have COVID. And so they don't want to touch my identity documents. They don't want to look at my passport or my driver's license or anything. But even if they do take those documents, the problem is after they've handled my documents, I don't want them back because I'm worried about the 100 people who've already been at the counter that day, and I'm worried I'm going to get COVID. So the unescapable conclusion of this is that we're going to have to get to touch-free identity, a way to do identity proofing that doesn't involve the physical handling of documents. So I want to introduce this concept I call the trust gap. When I go to a website the first time, it's like a first date. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to serve me, not if I'm going to be able to get what I want. So I'm not committed. I'm not sure if this website can help me today. So I'm not sure I want to sign up. The website, on the other hand, is not going to do anything for me until they're 100% certain it's me. So the user and the web service are in very different places when we start this transaction. And that's what I call the trust gap. We've seen this trust gap before. In 1950, in the world before credit cards, if you wanted to buy the TV in the window that you saw at the local merchant, there were 3 choices on the menu. You could pay with cash, but you probably didn't have the cash with you. So then you would ask them to take your check. And if they didn't know you, they weren't going to take your check. The third choice on the menu was to get a line of credit. Now, in every small town across the world back in 1950, only the largest merchants could get you to take their line of credit because we're in 1950 and we're balancing our checkbook by hand. And so the largest merchants could get you to buy the TV on the line of credit. The problem was the small merchants couldn't. You weren't going to get a line of credit with the smaller merchants because you didn't want to have to balance your checkbook and write multiple checks and reconcile your bank account. So what we found in 1950 is all the small merchants couldn't sell anything because the line of credit became an obstacle. And so what we have is these 2 forces of friction in 1950. The merchants will only selectively accept checks from some people, and consumers will only take 1 or 2 lines of credit. And so we have these 2 forces of friction that are holding back the economy. And so in 1950, the first credit card was introduced, and it was called Diners Club. Look at the sales pitch here on the left. It's remarkable. You can use 1 credit card in 15,000 merchants. You're only going to get 1 monthly bill, and you don't have to reconcile your checking account because you just have to write 1 check. It's all done for you. Consumers love this idea. And it really transformed the economy. And what's interesting is what they call it. Look at the circle on the right. They called it the credit identification card. And that's really interesting to me because that's kind of exactly where we are in identity today. And so the thing you need to understand is when I go to a website and say my name is Andre, of course I want them to believe me and I want them to let me in. The challenge for them is they don't know if it's really Andre or not because they've never met Andre. And so the trick is convincing and giving the merchant enough trust to be able to accept the transaction. And that's what the credit card did. And when you think about credit cards, what's interesting is the way we pay for things has barely changed in 70 years. It started with a piece of paper. And the problem with the piece of paper is 1, is writing out credit card numbers by hand at the merchant was slow. And 2, the crooks figured it out to make the piece of paper. So then we moved on to embossed cards. And when we got to embossed cards, what's good is it sped up the transaction and also limited the fraud because that was harder to make. But eventually they figured out how to make the embossed card too. So then we moved on to magstripe. Magstripe sped the transaction up even more. And that was harder to replicate, but today replicating a magstripe is trivial. You can buy all of the components in the local store. So then we moved on to chip. And chip cards have been around for 30 years and they've never been compromised. But the big deficiency with chip cards today is that they don't work on the phone. They don't work online. So that's interesting to me is that what's interesting, we don't have to train people how to use their credit card. Everybody knows how to use a credit card. But that's not true of the internet. On the internet, we're introducing new security measures every single week to deal with the breach we had last week. And that's because it's me against the internet. And what's interesting about the credit card models, we have a trusted network in the middle. As a crook, I can't pop up in the middle and say, hey, I'm a crook, I take Visa. You have to behave well to stay in the network, and you have to apply to get in the network. And so this solves the problem of the man-in-the-middle attack we have on the internet. So we use that exact thinking to introduce a service in Canada called Verified Me that's doing the same kind of thing that the credit card network has done for payments, but for identity. And so we launched this service in May 2018, and it was built on the back of another service we have with the Government of Canada that was a single sign-on service that was very, very successful. But the concept is we take three things that everybody in Canada has: a cell phone, a bank account, and either a passport or a driver's license, and allow them to bring those three things together that effectively creates the equivalent of a physical credit card. The physical thing here is the SIM card in your phone. The PIN on your card is what that is, becomes the password on your bank account. And we add to it your photo that came from the province or the state. And so this has given us a way to create a credit card scheme or an identity scheme that works right across the economy. And it's been very successful here in Canada. And the idea behind the service is this. The idea is that, we forget about the internet for a minute. The way the real world works is if I want to get a service, I bring either my driver's license or my passport, and they might ask me to bring a bank statement or utility bill. So I use the stuff I have, which is the stuff on the left, to get the stuff that I want on the right. And so what's good about this model is that, when you looking at the left here, we want to keep what works. So every web service and every merchant makes their own rules about what you have to get into their service. So that's kind of good because we're not forcing them to all use the same thing. And when I come, maybe I bring my passport and I bring a bank statement. And when you come, you decide you're going to bring your driver's license and maybe a utility bill, and both of those are valid choices. So what's good about it, there's a plurality of providers. And if you don't like the provider you have today, you can change and still get new services tomorrow. And there is some privacy with this service. When I use my driver's license and I used it to get on an airplane and sign up an Airbnb and buy a lottery ticket online, the government didn't get to see what I did. So there is some privacy with this model. And users and businesses already get this practice. So this is all the things that we do in person today that work pretty well. There are some deficiencies, however, with the way we do on identity proofing. One of the biggest problems is the oversharing of data. If I want to show that I've lived in my house for more than 6 months, they ask me to bring bank statements or utility bill. And all they wanted to know is if I've lived there for 6 months, but what they get is 6 months of financial transactions is way too much data. So we're giving too much data away in these transactions today, so that's a problem. The other problem is clever guys like me know how to Photoshop the documents and make it say whatever I want. So the problem is there's no way for the destination service to verify the document I'm giving them came from that source and hasn't been altered. And the next thing is this thing I call card not present. Back to my credit card analogy. When you buy something in person at the terminal with an EMV card, the chance of fraud is almost zero. However, when you buy something online like at Amazon, Amazon didn't get to see your card. So that's called card not present, which means the risk is higher than an in-person transaction. And Amazon pays a higher fee. Here's the interesting thing. All identity today, even the identity we do at the counter, is card not present. If I know enough about you, I can be you, and I can sign up for a service in your name. So we want to fix that. And the last problem with identity today is it doesn't work online and it doesn't work at the call center either. So we want to fix this if we're going to build a good digital identity scheme. And so here's an example of how the service can be used. Rogers is one of the large wireless carriers here in Canada. On the left, they've sent me an email proposition to ask me if I want to get a phone on a plan. And so they've given me two choices. If you look at the left panel, I can sign up the existing Rogers way, or I can use this new service called Verified Me. So if I click on the Verified Me button because I want to sign up that way because I've already got that service, what it does is the very first thing it does is invokes my mobile banking app. Royal Bank of Canada is in the second panel here, and this is who I bank with. So what Verified Me does first is invoke your banking app and gets you to authenticate with them the same way you do for online banking every single day. If you're successful doing that, then in the third panel, we set the menu for you. So we're making really clear, Rogers, the service you just asked about, wants some data about you to get the service that you wanted. So they want some information from your bank account, which is this base profile thing here, and they want some information from the credit bureau to show that you're a good credit risk. So if I agree to share that data, Then on panel 4, boom, they're going to send me a phone on a plan, even though I didn't have to go see them in the store. Now, I just want to compare and contrast this for a moment. Today, none of the carriers in Canada will sell you a phone on the internet without meeting you first, because they're worried that you're not who you say you are, and you're going to send this phone somewhere else, and they're going to have a loss on their hands. So to get this phone on a plan today, I have to go down to the store. Now, I don't, this is pretty consistent across the world. If you're signing up for a new phone or any other kind of product that, we really need to know it's you, it typically takes about 20 minutes at the counter. So this might cost them $50 to do this at the counter today. At the end of it, the problem is they still don't know if it's really me, because I could have a fake driver's license. So what's neat about this service now is we've taken their cost from $50 down to $2. And more importantly, we've checked the identity against the bank, against the government, and against the mobile phone provider that I'm using already to verify the identity. So the risk of the transaction is almost zero. It's become card-present identity. We have the same kind of trust gap in digital health in Canada. We don't have any online health services in Canada at all because it's too risky. The data is too sensitive. And so here we have Annie. She's a type 1 diabetic child, and her mom wants to manage her health care for her. So to do this today, if we wanted to do it on the internet, we'd have to give Annie a long, crazy password, and it wouldn't be Annie typing in the password, it's going to be her mom. And so this is just one example, and we can see that if she wants to access multiple services or multiple hospitals, she's going to have a lot of different user IDs and passwords. And so we have two problems here. One is that the user is never going to remember this silly password that's on the screen. And two, it's not going to solve the problem anyway, because the crooks are going to be able to perform a password harvesting at a data site and get a breach and get all the data. And they're going to get the data that way. So we can't do this in healthcare. We need a better scheme. So Niagara Health is a regional health authority that runs a bunch of hospitals in Southern Ontario, which is around Toronto in Canada. And they were trying to figure out how they could launch services in the time of COVID-19 so people could still get access to healthcare without coming into the hospital. So what they wanted to do is, at the left is the citizen or the patient is the place that we start. They're the one we're trying to serve. Now in Canada, we have government funded healthcare. So the Ministry of Health is responsible for giving me a healthcare card that entitles me to get access to healthcare in Ontario. And the third thing we've got to link together is the regional hospital, Niagara Health. And then we've got to connect this together with some identity information so that the patient, Annie, and her mom can get access to their healthcare information, and so she can navigate and advocate for her inside the healthcare system. So the way we do this is I want to create for myself an Ontario Health ID. So Ontario Health which is the regional health authority, not the hospital, allows me to use Verified Me to sign up. So that I could sign up with Google or Apple, but they're showing up with Verified Me. When I click on this, the same kind of thing as before. I'm going to log in with my bank the same way I do for online banking every day. And if I'm successful doing that, the next thing I have to do is link in my healthcare card to get access to my hospital information. So I take some information off my healthcare card. We go verify that against the health issuing authority. And if we're successful doing that, I'm able to get access to my healthcare now online. So Annie, mom, can now access her healthcare records directly while still keeping it separate from her own healthcare records. So that's in healthcare. I want to talk about another example. This is the government of Canada. Our tax authority is called CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency. And we're in COVID, and so they had this problem of having to distribute funds or money basically to Canadians who were out of work during times of COVID. And so the challenge they had today is that I'm not sure where different banks in different countries do this differently, but the bank account number, there's no way to verify the number. And so their risk is if somebody shows up and says, my name's Andre, I want the emergency response benefit, and here's my bank account number, there's no way for the government to verify that the bank account number belongs to Andre Boyson. And so they have this problem. They pay the benefit, and then they go chase the person after. That's the problem they had prior to our service. And so now what this service does is I can use a fictional bank here on the lower left called My Bank. And with My Bank, I can prove it's, I've got control of a bank account that was issued to me by a bank known in Canada. I've gone through a KYC process, and here's the valid bank number that belongs to Andre Boyson. And if I want to take it further, I can bring in my government issued photo ID and put that together. So now the government of Canada can pay my benefit knowing it's really me and knowing that the fraud risk for them is going to be very, very low. Here's one more example that goes in another way. Maybe I'm going to get a new credit card. So I'm with my bank today, but I've decided, because I'm helping my dad with his healthcare services and whatnot, and I'm helping him in his older age, that we want to get a joint bank account together and a credit card so I can help him pay for some of his at-home healthcare services. So the problem with RBC today is they don't know Andre, and so it's very easy for a crook to pretend to be Andre and try and set up an account. So in this model, my bank, who I already have a relationship, is going to allow me to share my KYC data with RBC so I can get this new credit card that I want to share with my dad. But they don't know me, so they also want proof of income. So now I can also use my bank data to prove who I am to the Canada Revenue Agency, and they can give me a proof of income, i.e. what my taxes said I made on my tax return from last year. And I can take these two things together and now get a new credit card without ever meeting RBC in person. And this is, again, quite remarkable in Canada. Around the world today, getting bank accounts is a regulated process through Know Your Client and AML regulations. This meets the AML and KYC regulations for the bank now in Canada, because the regulations have been updated to support digital onboarding. And so that's an example of what COVID has taught us, is that the first thing we've got to recognize is, even pre-COVID, we have this trust gap when it comes to delivering services online. We have a user who wants to get access to a service, and they have no easy way to prove who they are to the service they want to get. The service wants to let customers in, but they want to keep the crooks out. And the problem is the crooks are better at me than I am. In today's world, they ask me questions. They'll say, where did you go to high school? What's your mother's maiden name? What was your Volvo payment in 2007? And this is the funny thing. I'm Andre Boyson, and I can't pass the Andre Boyson test because I'm trying to remember the answer to these questions about my own life. The irony is the crook doesn't have to remember anything. They've got it on a piece of paper from a data breach they got off the dark web. So the crook gets it right 100% of the time, and I can't answer the questions. The best proof your customer is on the internet today is they can't answer the questions. And this is what the trust gap is. So we also learned that during times of pandemics, we're going to need digital identity infrastructure to let the COVID people triage, go to the COVID hospital, and let everybody else go to the regular hospital. But we don't just need it for healthcare. We need it for the rest of the economy too. I gave you the example of my lawyer helping me sign a transaction for a real estate transaction. But even simple things, the problem the car dealers are finding is that nobody wants to go to the car dealers right now because of COVID. How does Volkswagen sell a car on the internet? They need to know it's really me. They need to know I've got good credit, and then they've got to find a way to get the licensing done. And they're worried that if it's not real Andre, whoever gets the car is going to stick it in a container and ship it overseas somewhere, and they'll never get they're going to have a loss on their hands. So we need it for the rest of the economy too. And the last thing we learned, and we talked about this beginning, is the future of identity is going to be touch-free identity, one that doesn't involve the physical handling and inspection of documents like passports, driver's license, and utility bills. And so I wanted to leave a couple minutes for questions. I think I'm at time, and so that's what I wanted to share with you today, and I'll see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. So I'll open up the floor to the audience for questions. Please feel free to unmute your microphones, or you can type in the chat window as well. Okay, so you mentioned about this Niagara Health case study. So
Yes.
is it being like, how do you measure the protectability of this solution? Like it is, not vulnerable against any attack. So how do you make sure that your solution is safe and secure?
That's a really good question. There's a blockchain element to this, and if we have some time, I'll go into that detail. But the simple answer is this: the problem the government of Canada had back in 2012 is that when I go to the government of Canada, I haven't been there for an entire year. Chances are I forgot the password, and that was actually the truth. In 2012, Canadians were forgetting the password every single year. And so when you contrast that with a bank account as an example, like government, banks have a very high duty of care as it relates to managing the account. Unlike government, I'm in my bank account every single day. So when I go to my bank and I can't get in, I'm on DEFCON 5. I'm terrified the crooks are spending my money. And so I'm going to go down to the bank right away and solve that problem. And so what's interesting when you compare a government account to a bank account, the user will notice much more quickly and do the right thing out of self-interest. And so what this means for government is it shuts down the fraud. And that implies in healthcare too. So what we're bringing to this healthcare transaction in Niagara Health is when you think about the credit card network, you have a physical EMV chip, and that card can't be copied. And it also has a PIN. So whoever does the transaction has to have the card, which can't be copied, has to know the PIN, and most importantly, the card can't be reported stolen. When I lose my card, I will notice quickly and do the right thing, which I do make the phone call, which means the bank turns it off. When the crook who found it, even if they know the PIN, they can't use the card. Well, in our model, it works the same way. The SIM card in your phone is actually the same chip that's in your payment card. So to do this transaction, you have to have my phone, which has my SIM card, which I haven't reported stolen. You have to know the password to my bank account, and you have to have a driver's license or a passport that was issued to my name. And so we think those three things separately are quite tough, but together, very, very difficult for a crook to get possession of those things and take over my identity.
Okay, perfect. That's really great. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, so I think there are no more questions. Thank you very much. It was a great talk, and thanks for your precious time and sharing your ideas. So thank you very much. Have a
Thanks so
good
much for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to listening to some of the other speakers after this. And thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you.